What is Europe? What do we think of when we say the word Europe? For me, Europe was something very personal. I was 16 when the war started in my country. 30 years has passed since the end of that war, but I still feel I'm catching up. Europe meant a place in which all is free and equal. Chances are the same for everyone. Europe was something people were dying for, and it was worth fighting for. Europe for me meant that no one can redesign its meaning, because it was that ultimate goal. Nothing was better in this world than Europe. So what is the meaning of Europe today? Is it still something worth fighting for?
Sound rolling. Ready?
Ready.
The reason we have such a higher standard of living today than we did 250 years ago is because of what you might call the Enlightenment ideals, the fact of science, that respect for truth, thinking about the design of organizations, checks and balances, rule of law, democratic processes.
How would you describe it in terms of, let's say, politics and political idea of what basis of this Europe that we live today is?
I think what we need to focus on is a set of political and civic values that have been developed in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. And we need to associate this civic dimension to a political project, which is, of course, the project of European integration, which had a very practical goal, and that was to end centuries of violent conflict on the continent, and to use those values as a bind, as a bind for those political institutions. Today there is a debate about a European civilization, which I think is deeply flawed. These values, obviously, many of them grew and flourished in Europe from the Renaissance onwards in political thinking and philosophy that flourished in Europe, but they don't belong to Europe. There is no exclusivity around it. These are values that are available to those who are interested in peace and democracy as a political project. So I think we need to be careful when we're talking about European identity in sort of, divorcing the cultural, the historical roots, what belongs to each of us in terms of experience from a political project, which is which ought to be deeply tied to a set of civic values that can belong to any political project. So there's nothing inherently European about it. What is unique is that after the Second World War, the European political leadership decided to use those values as a pillar of a new political project.
The United States cares greatly about the people of Europe. We really do. We really do. We really do.
World War II is over. It is over in the way that the lessons, the experiences are not going to be the guiding ones. Europe was very much born out of the ashes of the World War II, and it's not by accident that the best history of Europe, Tony Judd's one, is called post-war. Because Europe was post-war exactly because it was born out of the experience of the World War II, but secondly because Europe was about a continent that does not believe anymore that a big war is possible. And this is not true anymore. So, strangely enough, war is possible. Europe feels very much threatened by its very successes. The very fact that we cannot imagine a war is becoming existential vulnerability. So what are the 3 or 4 things that really kind of worries me? In general, I do believe that there are going to be 3 things that are going to change very fast. One has a lot to do with technology. We can talk as we want, but the generational gap between those who are now in their 60s and 70s and my generation of how you basically consume information, how you see the world is incredible. And this is very much based on how they basically orient themselves in the world. There's going to be a demographic change. We are living longer, we are aging, but we are shrinking, and secondly, younger people are a big minority. This is the most important minority in Europe. They don't have the numbers, and because of it, they're not as important in democratic politics than you can expect. And certainly what is very important is that the world in which we have been living, Europe that we have been building, was very much based on the idea that for something to be legitimate, we should have chosen it ourselves. So it was the ideology of choice. But suddenly we start choosing so much, so many things, that you cannot make a distinction anymore between choosing and picking. We're creating a generation that is redeciding all the time. You have this anxiety very much rooted in this totally obsession with choice. And how we're going to live in a moment in which not all choices are equally important. When some choices should stay in order for society basically to be anchored. In my view, is this cultural moment, because when you're asking about Europe, listen, for Europe to succeed, it should be a place that people understand and where they feel that they're understood. And this is not clear now. To what extent people understand what is going around them, and it's not clear do they feel understood, and many of the kind of political aberrations that you see are very much the result of it. Suppression of human beings by institutions people cannot even grasp, not in their meaning, not in their logic, not in their unfolding, not in the pain they may create for the human beings subordinated to them. So I think the rethinking bureaucratic domination again in 100 years after we have created institutions which would have had the potential to liberate human beings, to allow them more space of more movement, more autonomous decision making, and so on. And in a way, the old forms of domination and suppression have been replaced by more recent, more modern, more but less. Maybe less conspicuously visible ones, but nevertheless deeply effective. And so, I think this would be my concern about old patterns of domination in a new and sophisticated and inauthentic because disguised form.
So I think we both need to remember where we've come from, but I think it is fair to say that we need to reimagine the future in the sense that the narrative that brought Europe about, peace on the continent after 2 world wars, that is a narrative that for generational reasons has kind of lost a lot of its, momentum. Europe as a project for prosperity, which I think was really, so whereas that first Europe was the Europe of the 1950s and 60s and maybe 70s, we then get into the Europe of the 1980s and 90s and early 2000s, and that was the Europe of prosperity. From the interrailing to the Erasmus to the single market to monetary union to enlargement. That had also a lot to do with prosperity. That then, in a sense, came to an end or lost its momentum, especially after the global financial crisis. And I think basically since then, we've been struggling to understand what the new narrative is. And I think we have a sense that the new narrative is really one that is far more global in nature. So as Europe and Europeans confront threats that affect their daily lives that everyone is aware of, from wars to climate change to pandemics, everyone really understands that the national level is simply too small to deal with these questions. As I said, tech, climate, demography, wars, And so I think intuitively, everyone understands that you need a European dimension to address these challenges. But all this hasn't quite coalesced in a word, right? Peace, prosperity. We're still lacking that overall narrative to hold all of these global challenges together.
What would you, from your expertise and field of work, but as a strategic mind, name like 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 biggest threats or challenges in front of Europe in the next 5 years?
Well, I could go for the usual ones, right? So climate change, obviously demographic decline, wars and conflicts that we have. But I think the greatest challenge, threat to Europe is actually its own social contract that needs to be rewritten. And it needs to be rewritten with people, with citizens, co-edited by them, co-authored by them. There is a great deal of feeling of injustice and unfairness. To bring this together, you need to rewrite the social contract. And for that to happen, you need to rebuild trust. And trust doesn't come with treaties, it doesn't come with policies, it doesn't come with, briefs and glossy reports. It comes when you see it in your daily life, fair wages, schools that teach kids, truth and they're high quality. Institutions that are responsible and they actually take accountability for what they do. And this is something that needs to be done in Europe.
Well, the first challenge is to agree on the rules of the game. Without those rules, this edifice will crumble. And it's pretty clear that the rule of law, meaning abidance by the set of rules we all agreed upon, is a precondition for continuing in this journey of sharing sovereignty, something that nobody else has ever tried to do. So this is my main concern. But then there are many others which are also related to demography, the fact that at the end of the day we are becoming less and less relevant also numerically, and the fact that the social cohesion in Europe is not where it was. So we really have to make hard choices and to decide basically where the center of gravity is. Is the national capitals or is something bigger than us that will enable Europe to speak with one voice and to share common objectives. At the moment, I don't see much political or social cohesion, rather the opposite, which is very counterintuitive, because that's exactly what Europe would need to survive, given the amount of challenges, both ideological and material, that are brought against us.
Not getting too comfortable, relearning democracy and political representation, and then perhaps last of all, bringing together security and freedom and balancing these things in a world where things are happening with accelerated speed. We have a lot of anxiety to deal with on a personal level. All of this change, even the positive one, takes its toll. So I think just dealing with the reality of everyday life is going to require new ways of doing things.
I have to say I am worried about the future of Europe. I am worried because I don't think that we are managing well the transition of a Europe that has been at the forefront of the political arena, let's say, to something possibly lesser. Lesser because, first of all, we have this demographic challenge to deal with, and also it's a fait accompli that Europe will be smaller. Economically, we are very strong still, but I wonder whether we are moving to a situation where Europe will be more of a regional power, an important regional power. There are other important regional powers, but not necessarily one of the global powers. And I think managing this transition is the biggest challenge that Europe faces today. And this will dictate what kind of relationship it wants to have with future global powers and other middle powers.
EU feels a bit like a sort of besieged island in a sea of geopolitics. And we realize we have less power, the economic dynamism is elsewhere. We have to fight to protect what we have achieved over the decades rather than exporting our ideas and our ways of doing to other countries. I think that would be a bad mistake to draw the conclusion that we have to pull back and we have to now focus exclusively on our own continent, trying to protect ourselves. I think, on the contrary, we need to reach out. We have to develop new partnerships with countries around the world that fundamentally have a similar idea of the world order as it should be, rules-based, based on some degree of values. There are lots of countries in the world that do not want to go down the way of geopolitics and fighting, and the might is the rights of might, basically, but who insist on some kind of coherent order, and the EU is the logical hub of such an alliance of countries that are committed to some degree of international law and international order. It's an uphill struggle, particularly now, but it's absolutely worthwhile.
Much remains to be done.
I think there is a big discrepancy of people who can see beyond an electoral cycle and the imprisonment of the establishment in Western Europe on electoral cycles. It doesn't correspond with the needs of today. It doesn't correspond with the answers of today, and it doesn't correspond with paving the way for tomorrow. We see that, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and you have states in Eastern Europe who kept warning the West for a decade that this is going to happen, and they were diminished and brushed aside as one-sided and obsessed. And then the Western part of Europe recognized its own shortcomings, but it hasn't done anything to address them. And I think this cannot become the debate about the East and the West and who is right, but about perspectives that may sound right and and have an impact on how we build our joint house. But it cannot be a joint house if there is going to be delay in accession. No way.
Possibly the first challenge is to think about the next generation. So what it is that we are leaving to them. I think there's too much decision-making and policy-making that is about ourselves and not thinking about what we're leaving, which I think is probably different to previous generations. There's an obvious challenge in terms of what brings us together and our principles relating to democracy and freedom. And also, I think there's obviously a need for an institutional change, like thinking about what the role of institutions are in society, how to protect what's good in them and the good that they do, and also prevent them from being corrupted.
I think that when you look at big tech or you look at AI, or in the future when you look at quantum computing, when quantum meets AI, I think that privacy is the biggest issue. How do we ensure that our lives and what we do remains private to us and is not just eventually down the line utilized into some different product that changes how we behave?
Now future is something that starts scaring us. On the left, people are scared because of climate. On the right, they're scared because of demography. But both of them are scared. And I'm saying this because, in my view, future is the most important and invisible institution of democracy that people don't realize. Because in a democracy, the idea is we're going to solve this problem today, but there is also tomorrow, and we are going to solve the next problem there. The idea that there is always tomorrow, and this tomorrow is open, and we can basically shape it. And this tomorrow can be different than today. And it very much depends on us. Tomorrow is a reassuring factor. If you don't believe that there is tomorrow, then every election is the last election. And if the election is the last election, they cannot be free and fair. And I'm saying this because there is an apocalyptical streak that I see both on the left and on the right, which in my view is the biggest problem that I see.
Feeling is something that people can share maybe more easily than a policy paper. So what is this feeling that you've mentioned that is needed in Europe today, in Europe where feelings of grievance, feelings of being left out, creating deep divides, polarization, inequalities? What is this feeling that can make Europe, I won't say great again, God forbid, but I will say appealing enough for next generation of Europeans that, as you rightly mentioned, don't have this direct experience of what happened on this continent 80 years ago?
I think it's a very good question. And honestly, if you were looking for emotional answer, you wouldn't look in the EU, you wouldn't look in the back rooms, you wouldn't go to Brussels, you wouldn't go to Prime Minister's office, you even wouldn't go on the 8th or 9th of May to European capitals. It's gone. The spirit was there. I remember it 20 years ago, just before the accession, just after accession. You should go to Maidan. Perhaps until recently, I thought you should go to Serbia, to the protesters. I think for many reasons, EU failed those people on the streets, and they might be not looking to European Union as a sort of solution for their own democratic struggle. But in many places, Georgia, Ukraine, in Europe, people are thinking of Europe as a sort of aspiration. I think they think of European Union as a better life. And, you know, I always remember how angry I was when I heard people of EU, when I was outside speaking of Europe. Europe did that, Europe did something. I said, well, we are part of Europe. We haven't done that much. We haven't, you know, we've been sort of omitted. I think it's very important to keep in mind that not to exclude someone from European community, even if they are not still part of European Union. And, you know, the last thing I feel is important is that if you think that emotions are irrelevant, if you think that emotions are dangerous, you're just leaving them to someone else, because the populists will pick up emotions. And I think the passion also of feeling that, you know, you're not European in an abstract. I am European because I am Paul. Someone else is European because she is Serbian, or someone else because he is French. So why not try to combine it in a sort of spirit of 1848, when there were people who were both liberals, nationalists, and thirdly also Europeans. So I believe that, you know, you can wave the national flag and still feel committed European. And I think it's one of the passions, I don't say it's the only one, but I think it's one of the passions that we should not forget.
Western Europe has lived for a very long period in peace, basically 70 years. And I always ask the question, what does it mean to have lived for so long in a period of peace? There's a complacency, there's a feeling that democracy is like the air we breathe. You don't know it until the oxygen supply is cut off. And I think the key message has to be, there is nothing given about our and your freedom. There is nothing that you can count on without getting involved yourself. Not everyone will be involved, not all young people will be involved, but there must be an understanding that democracy and freedom have to be defended every morning, lunchtime, and evening.
Each generation has to find its own way to its own fulfillment of dreams, or banning the horrors of what, you know, they may have also inherited. So fighting the demons, cultivating the opportunities and the chances we have. Also, we are, all of this is built on riches. This is a very, very rich society. These are rich societies. And so the resources are around, and what the next generation will be able to do with it, our generation has to, live it through the post-war period, and this is a totally different generation, and I'm confident that they will find their own way to whatever. Prevent misery and, if not, create happiness.
If you think of a song, a movie, a series, a book, a philosopher, of a thought that relates to Europe the most, or which is close to your heart, or fond to you in terms of, inspiration, or what best describe, whatever sentiment of Europe is, what would it be, just to know?
O partigiano, portami via. It's a moment of resistance. It's a moment in which we need to resist the different attacks. They challenge us at all possible levels. So I need to go back to my grandfather singing me O Partigiano, because he has been a partisan in the mountains in Italy for 2 years of his life. So that's what I remember of him.
Can you hear it, the sound? You have been missed here, and I can't wait to see you again. It's really surreal. You're standing next to your apartment that's being ruined with the bomb, and I'm staying in a country in which, when I was 16, the war started. How important it is to have that in mind, of two of us talking with these two wars on the European soil that basically one marked the end of the last century, the Ukrainian war marking not just our recent years, but the concept of our European future altogether.
I really wish that those with whom we're discussing the future of Europe, I wish they never feel the same. Because it's normal for people not to know the war, and partially not to be prepared for it. Doesn't matter how you're packing your documents or you're trying negotiations, we always are unprepared to work because people don't want to believe in the bad. We are dreamers.